You know what I don't have? I have the mission statement, but I don't have the guidelines. But that's okay, I know them by heart. I'd like to welcome everyone. It's Saturday morning, September 10th, 2022, to the Erace meeting. And we are being recorded, so everyone needs to be on their best behavior. Okay. Some housekeeping rules. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a mute button that looks like a microphone. You can turn it on and turn it off as need be, and we'd like everyone to mute themselves unless they're speaking. There is a start and stop video, which can you turn your camera on and off if for some reason that you don't want to be seen or whatever. There is a big red button somewhere on the screen that will allow you to leave the meeting if you wish to. There's also a participant screen, a chat screen where you can put comments in the during the meeting to the group. And there is a participant screen which allows you to see who is in the meeting, and also you can change your name if you wish to on that screen. So anyway, also to start off, let's see, we will go around and do introductions. What else? I don't have my sheet with me. Oh, you raise one finger and wave it around so that we can see it. If you wish to comment, you can get on the list. We go in the order of the list. If you have a clarifying question of the speaker, you put two fingers up. And a clarifying question is, I didn't understand what you meant. Could you please further explain what you meant by? It's not to make a statement or to make an opposing statement to the speaker at that time. You get on the list for that. The meeting is an hour and a half. We try to keep it to an hour and a half. And in 15 minutes before, or if we have a large group, around 11:10 or so, we start with the final wrap up. If you haven't spoken during the meeting, you can take the full 2 minutes, which I didn't mention before. It's like, please try to keep your comments to roughly about 2 minutes. But at that point, then it's a minute to do your final thoughts. And so now we will go around and do introductions as I see people on the screen. And I am Nancy Moore and have been coming to Erace since June of 2007. So we will start with Marion.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marion Lagarde. I'm here in New Orleans. I've been participating in these discussions since 1993. How do I make myself small, Nancy? Because I'm looking on the screen trying to find a button to make myself small.
You want to see everybody? You can only see you? Okay, there's a button.
No, I see everybody's small at the top of the screen and I'm big and I want to be small.
The gallery view is what shows everybody.
Okay.
There should be a button that shows.
Okay.
It's the top right on my computer screen.
There it is.
View. Yeah.
I got it. Everybody.
Okay. There, I didn't mention that. There's speaker view and there is gallery view. Okay. Yeah. Louise.
Hi, I'm Louise. I've been coming for over 2 decades, on and off, firstly in New Orleans and now in Austin, Texas.
Okay, thank you. Marva, are you able to?
My name is Marva. I've been coming post Katrina, and I look forward to live discussions every Saturday.
All right, thank you. Marla?
Good morning. That's my neighbor mowing, so it's really loud. My name is Marla. I'm in the New Orleans area, Metairie specifically. I've been coming for the last couple years and looking forward to today.
Thank you. Phyllis?
Good morning. I'm Phyllis. I'm in New Orleans and I've been coming to Erace since 2008.
Thank you. Pedro?
Hey, good morning. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and have been coming the last 2+ years, I think, and appreciate the experience every time. So thank you all.
Thank you. Nora?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Nora. I'm in Austin, and I've been coming for about a year now, and glad to be here.
Thank you. Lynn?
Good morning. I'm Lynn Frank, living in New Orleans. I've attended meetings since the summer of 2019. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you. Hi, Shelly. Shelly?
Hi.
There you go. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Shelly Mcguire. I actually Nancy's sister-in-law. I live in Rock Island, Illinois, and in 2018 was visiting Nancy.
Yeah, 18.
And
yeah.
attended a meeting, and I think I attended one other meeting last year, maybe through Zoom. So, hello, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. It's great to have you today. Larry?
Good morning. I'm Larry. I've been part of Erace since about 1995. Happy to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn? Okay, maybe Glenn is other duties. Go. I hope I don't have hiccups. Greer?
My name is Greer, and I've been coming to Erace since, I think, 2008, post-Katrina. Thank you, and good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Okay. And also I forgot to read the our mission statement. Eracism is the slogan of the group Erace, which was formed in New Orleans in the summer of 1993. We seek ways through person-to-person communication to show that we are committed to treating fellow human beings of all colors with love and respect. Join us. Okay. Today, I brought this article. Well, Phyllis told me I had to have an article by Wednesday. So I was looking through, and the one I printed out cut off half the article. But anyway, I was looking online and I found this article about the Cherokee Nation is opening a new exhibit to talk about or show or acknowledge, probably more so, that the 5 nations, which were the Cherokee, the Choctaw, Cherokee, Choctaw. It was 5 of them. I'll find it on my phone. That moved from southeastern, along the Trail of Tears, moved from southeastern United States to the Midwest in the Oklahoma area. And but they had slaves. And I already knew that from watching an episode of Henry Louis Gates' Who Do You Think You Are? Where he explores roots, and Don Cheadle was his guest, and John Cheadle's family were enslaved by I don't think it was the Cherokee, but they were enslaved by Native Americans or indigenous people. And that was the first time that I'd ever heard that, because you always heard, particularly in New Orleans, that the slaves and the Native American people they helped facilitate hiding escaped slaves, and that's the reason that you have the Mardi Gras Indians, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But or if you have another story of the history of the Mardi Gras Indians. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. We've never discussed this before, and I just thought it would be an interesting topic to bring to the group. Okay, so that's why I brought it. We can get started. Who would like to attend first? Also, there is a raised hand feature. Let's see, where is it? Is it in? I'm not sure where it is though. There's a raised hand feature.
It's under the toolbar that says reactions. You click on that and there are things you can do. There's like waving thumbs up.
Okay,
down.
yeah, okay. Under reactions, there is a raised hand feature. So if your camera is off and you would like to raise your hand, you can raise your hand. Okay, there we go. Muskogee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole tribes. There's one more. Because it was the 5 civilized nations. Because they were
Creek
called
Indians.
that, huh?
The Creek.
Creek, okay,
Creek.
because they owned slaves. That's interesting. Okay, so who would like to start off the conversation? Marion.
I looked up some more information, and you just named the 5 civilized tribes, and they people ask questions online, and they ask why were these tribes called civilized, and it says that they had developed extensive economic ties with whites or had assimilated into American settler culture. They wore European clothing, they spoke English, they practiced Christianity, and they even owned slaves, which is what we started talking about. So that's why they were called the 5 civilized tribes: the Seminole, the Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and the Creek.
Okay, Cherokee is what is not included above. Okay. Is that it, Marion? Oh, that's good. Okay, next, the list is open. Marla?
Yeah, I don't have anything big to say, or I really just wanted to profess my own ignorance. I had no idea about any of this until I read this article. So thank you for bringing this article to the group.
Louise.
And I mentioned this as the topic to my husband, and we were talking a little about it last night. And he was also under the impression, I think, that Indigenous people were friends with Black folks, if there was not enslavement. So those were some of the things that we were taught. I wasn't taught. I don't remember any of this. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Marla. Louise?
Yeah, I kind of just say the same thing. I was ignorant of this as well, and I found it quite saddening, and especially when they were trying to be actual members of the tribe, and they were refused that. I thought that was extremely sad for them, and just, not only part of their bloodline was brought over and enslaved, but then the other part was ignoring them and not accepting them into the fold. So those people must have felt, I can't even imagine how they feel. And their ancestors now are not ancestors, their people now are very happy that they've been accepted. But I think that was a horrible slap in the face for them. And yeah, I was ignorant to this. Thank you very much for bringing this, because this is exactly what these meetings are for, and I love that.
Marion? Okay, Marion and then Phyllis.
You can put me on.
Okay. Marion?
I immediately, when I read the article, I thought about this tradition here in New Orleans for Mardi Gras, the Mardi Gras Indians, and the written media, and also the television media jumped on this a few years ago and did a documentary about why the Black people in New Orleans, this group of people masquerade as Indians, and every Mardi Gras, they call them the Mardi Gras Indians. And they did a write-up, and also, you know, as I said, also a television documentary. And they asked them, well, why you as descendants of Africans dress up like Indians on Mardi Gras? And they said that the spokesperson said that they did this because the Choctaws saved a lot of enslaved people in the Louisiana area, New Orleans area. They would hide them. They would help them escape from the slave masters, and their dressing up as Indians on Mardi Gras Day was a sort of a tribute and a thank you to the Native American people that helped them escape slavery. So I'd read about this some time ago, and I said, well, this is another take on it, because a lot of people, a lot of Black people were expressing gratitude to the Native American people that lived in this area, in the Louisiana area, for helping the people, the Black people escape slavery. So this gives another point of view, and I'm glad you brought this to us.
Okay, thank you, Marion. Next we have Phyllis and then Glenn, and then the list is open.
So I remember, Nancy, watching that episode of the Henry Louis Gates with Don Cheadle, and I remember that when they did his DNA test, he had no Cherokee or any Native American DNA, blood, whatever. And he had a really interesting reaction. Like, he was almost insulted that they did not, the Native American people that had enslaved his family members in the past had not thought of them human enough to have babies with, I guess, was the thing. And he also acknowledged, I think, that a lot of times when enslavers make babies with enslaved people, it's through rape. So he also acknowledged that. And it is, I mean, in my mind, it's possible that some Choctaw took Black people as slaves, and maybe they did it through, you know, attacks on white settlers who had slaves. I don't know. And it's also possible others took the opposite stance and helped them if they ran away. I don't know that the Native Americans were trying to free anybody, but if they found somebody, you know, like the Mardi Gras Indians say, they helped keep them away from the whites who were looking for them. So they certainly knew how to stay away and hide in the land better than people who weren't born here. But I think it's not such a this and that. There's a lot of nuance and stuff that we all probably need to learn and figure out through research and study. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn, and then the list is open.
Well, you know, some of the stuff we talking about, you know, it's not based on no facts. It's just based on, you know, our feelings. You know, first of all, having babies with the slave master was not always rape. A lot of was that they were married to the slave, and they give the child the Creole race that we have in Louisiana, where they inherit land, they inherit slaves. It wasn't out of rape that the child had his father's name and inherit his property. That child wasn't born out of rape. They married that slave.
Louise? Greer?
And also that that picture we have of the American Indian, like, oh no, they just victims of the white man. No, they victimized other tribes. They enslaved other tribes, killed the men, took the women, took the children, enslaved them.
Phyllis?
And another comment on the Mardi Gras Indians. Black people hated them. Black people hated themselves so much. They hated who they were. They wanted to be somebody else other than who they were. So that's how the Mardi Gras Indians, that's where the Mardi Gras Indians come from, because they did not like themselves and they wanted to be another people. And we still that way.
Okay.
I heard the bell, right?
Yes, you did. Okay. All right. Thank you. I have you, Amal.
You can put me back on the list.
And put you back on the list. Amal, I
Yeah, I
have
know
you.
somebody gonna try to ambush me.
Do you have a clarifying question?
No,
Okay.
put me on the list.
No, Amal has a clarifying question. That's what. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I wanted to ask Glenn. He said that that there were situations between the slave master and slave women that wasn't rape, and I was wondering if he could give us a historical example of that, because he said that there were situations where they were actually getting married, and I want to know in the historical record if he could give an example of that.
The French settled the Louisiana, and Louisiana was a mosquito infested place. It was a very dangerous place for viruses and everything else. Yellow fever. The streets were muddy. And the women of France did not want to come to Louisiana and be married to these men. They did not want to leave France, where they had streets that were, weren't muddy. They had cultural centers. So the government told the men, marry the slave and raise the children as your own. Give them to, and that's what actually happened. The history is here that it actually happened that way. That's it.
All right, thank you. All right, we have on the list Louise, Greer, Phyllis, Amal, and then Glenn is back on the list. So Louise?
Well, Amal kind of touched on it because I feel that I think you'll find there was more rape than love and marriage between a slave, an enslaved African woman and a master, white master. I'm pretty sure. And I don't know what historical documents you're reading. I would love, Glenn, for you to tell me what historical documents you're reading to get this information. I know there was lots of prostitutes that were sent over to,
Larry.
And so what else? Oh, the Mardi Gras Indians. Yes, the fact about self-hatred, that's why they wanted to be anybody else but themselves. Again, not too sure about that. But yeah, rape, man, that's, there was a whole lot of rape going on. And to deny that fact, I think, is not really seeing the history there. That's it, babe.
Thank you, Louise. Next, Greer.
I knew about this history a long time ago. I remember I had a teacher who was, God rest his soul, he was murdered. But when I was in 6th grade, I had a substitute teacher, and everything he taught us wasn't basically from a book, and he taught us about this. But we know from history, the oppressed often oppress people. Oppressors become, the people who are oppressed become oppressed. And change is always going to be slow to happen. Like these other tribes don't want to acknowledge what's going on or don't want to add people to their roles, but everybody's missing the big thing. It's about money. To recognize these people, they get access to a lot of things. They get access to healthcare. They get access to stipends. And my cousin, he's a younger guy. He went to Oklahoma, and he knows a lot of people who are Indian just from his girlfriend who lived in Oklahoma. And it's set up for certain people to get money, even whites who they're not living as Indians, but just because they have paternal or maternal lineage, they have access to free education, stipends, free healthcare, because his girlfriend did. She had access to all of this. So a lot of reason why, honestly, it's a financial reason as to why they don't accept additional people. Because when you accept additional people, then that's less money to be dispersed to those who took that walk. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Greer. Next, we have Phyllis.
Well, I want to express my complete disagreement with what Glenn said regarding the white enslavers legally marrying and giving their names to the children of the women that they allegedly married with consent. That's just rubbish. That is not what was going on. Maybe it happened in occasional situations, but no, there was rape. And sorry if that offends your patriarchal leanings. I want to say that not all people who, I'm 100% against any kind of slavery, but not all slavery was done the way white Europeans and white Americans did it, in terms of it being targeted at a certain group who were considered inferior. Sometimes people took slaves when they had war, and they took people that they had conquered into their own societies and either had them as slaves. I would say mostly slaves. They probably weren't paid servants at any time. But I think when we think of slavery, we think of the very specific way it was done in this country. And so my point is, like Native Americans, they took white people when they raided villages or settlements, and they didn't do it because they were white. They did it because they were somebody that they had won a war or a battle over. So that's all for now.
All right, thank you, Phyllis. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Well, I guess dances with wolves, huh? He was captured.
I would take Kevin Costner films with a grain of salt.
Salt. Okay, thank you. Amal.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes. So I'm very familiar with this history as well. What they call the 5 civilized tribes, believe it or not, the Europeans are people who gave them this this designation because of the enslaved Africans they had. That's why they called them civilized, because they enslaved Black people. Otherwise, they would have been uncivilized by considered uncivilized by Europeans. But that's There's a documentary, actually, you should be able to pull it up on YouTube because that's where I saw it. And it's called Red Masters, red meaning the Native American, and masters being that they were slave masters of African people. So you should be able to pull that documentary up on YouTube, and it's called Red Masters, and it's a family that goes into the history of their family being owned by Native Americans as slaves. So as it relates to the slave master relationship in terms of marriage, first and foremost, the French were not allowed to marry African and or indigenous women by law. And you can look this up in a book actually written by Anne Rice called The Feast of All Saints. She wrote a book about this, as well as a movie was made about it. Now, they could have these women as what we would say in today's language, they're side pieces. They could have them as concubines, as little sexual toys. And they could have children with them, yes, but they were not allowed by law to marry them, which means, because that would mean that the inheritance gets passed on through that line. No, they had their wife who was white, and then they had their side piece who was black. And both of the women did have children, but they were not allowed by law to marry that black woman. They were not allowed by law to marry those black women because that would mean that the inheritance get passed down. It doesn't mean that they treated the children bad or anything. It just simply means that the system was different before the English invasion of Louisiana. So I don't know where these marriages that Glenn are talking about come from, but they didn't exist in Louisiana because by law, they were not allowed to marry these black women.
You want to get back on the list, Emma?
Oh no, I'm
No, you're done? Okay.
Yeah, I'm done.
All right. We have Glenn, we have Louise, we have Greer. No, we have Glenn, we have Larry, we have Greer, we have Louise. Is there anyone else that would like to get on the list? Lynn. Okay. So Glenn with the G.
Okay. Well, on the marriages, y'all are gonna have to do y'all research and stop talking about what y'all feel about what happened. Just go and do some research. But most of you, as y'all have said before, y'all don't like history. Y'all made a statement. Y'all do not like looking up history. I do. All right, now getting back to the Cherokees. The Cherokees were not like the other Indians. They adopted to white ways. They did not live in tents. They lived in log cabins. They did not dress in buckskins they adopted to the white ways. They spoke English. So they thought that would be protection for them. They'll be able to integrate into the white world. That's what they thought they were doing. And so, but I didn't know that they had slaves. This is something new that y'all brought. I didn't know they had slaves, but I can see it because they adopted to the white ways. They did not go out there with a bow and arrow and looking for a buffalo to shoot. They were growing and domesticating their animals just like white folks do. They grew corn. They grew wheat fields. They did everything so that they would be accepted by the white world. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Phyllis has a clarifying question.
Can you give us a book or an article or a website that
supports... I can't give you no book, but I know I looked at documentaries on it.
Can you name a documentary? Can you give us
Louisiana, a history.
Okay.
Thank you.
Shelly wants to get on the list. Okay, Marva has a clarifying question.
It's got to be last.
Marva. Loud too.
In the elementary school, I was taught that Indians saved the Europeans from starvation by showing them how to plant corn. And you say Europeans showed the Indian how to plant corn and wheat.
The European grew corn in Europe. They grew wheat in Europe. The Indians had to teach them how to grow that product. But where they landed at in that area, Plymouth Rock, the earth was sandy there, and they didn't know how to deal with that sandy earth. So the Indians taught them you had to put they put dead fish in there to make it able to grow. They had to show them that.
Okay. Thank you, Glenn. Okay, we have Larry, Greer, Louise, Lynn, Amal, and Shelly. Okay.
Put me back on the list.
And you, okay, and Glenn. All right, Larry.
Okay, I wasn't too knowledgeable about the relationship between the slaves and Indians, so I didn't really do no research on that subject to say a whole lot about it, but it's interesting. But in regards to what was said relative to the slaves not being raped by their slave masters, you know, there's something in law called statutory rape. And if a 35-year-old man were to have what he might call consensual sex with a 13-year-old, by law and by statute, it's rape. By the slave masters having sex with, by the slave masters raping the slaves are the enslaved. I have to be careful about that term slave, the enslaved. You know, statutorily is something that's created or regulated by statute. So by statute, the enslaved were chattel property. And so perhaps in the minds of the slave master, he was not raping his slave because that was his property. And this is an example of, you know, the oppressed taking on the attitude of the oppressors of what's called the Stockholm Syndrome, where the enslavers could do no wrong because the enslaved were their property. And so to say that they weren't raped is a gross misstatement. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Next we have Greer.
One of the richest Black women, she was born, and she was in Georgia. Her name was Amanda Dixon. She was born to a white planter who raped her 13-year-old mother at the time that he owned her. That 13-year-old wound up running this man's plantations. He's one of the biggest farmers in Georgia. He raised her, Amanda Dixon, as his daughter because she looked white enough to where nobody could tell who her mama was. And the woman who gave birth to her could never tell her who she was. She didn't find out who her mother was until like she was in her late 20s. So she was raised around her and she loved her, but she never knew this woman was her mother. Her father left her so much land and wealth. But this was the stipulation of the time. Nobody born a slave could own any property. So which meant his brother and all his family members took her to court under the premises, okay, you're a slave, because they knew, some of the people in the town knew that who her mother was, but she just never knew. But the end result is she did get the land. And it was based on the land, the money, and everything. It was based on the fact they didn't appeal to what was right. Her lawyer appealed to the fact that a white man's word and his wishes should be honored even in his death. And to say slaves, female slaves weren't raped or the enslaved weren't raped, how can you love somebody who owns you and does not give you a free will of choice to whether you want to be with them or not? You don't have the ability to know if you even love this person if you don't have the ability to walk away. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Greer. Okay, next we have Louise.
Okay, so I'm gonna romanticize it a little bit because, and I'm sure Lynn, you will know this story of Julie. I used to be a tour guide in the French Quarters, and we would tell the story of Julie, who was a light-skinned Creole lady who lived with a white Frenchman, not as a couple, even though they were a couple, but she was his, maid or whatever, under the guise of maid. Anyway, she would always implore to him, please, 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 will you marry me, blah, blah, blah. And she actually was in love with him. And her apparently, but not enough to marry her because it was the law and he couldn't marry her. And she was so upset that he wouldn't break the law for her that she actually froze to death on the roof of the house. This is the ghost story. And you can see her body there. Well, it's actually an orb, but anyway, it's an interesting story. But just to say that even in this romantic story, it was based on some truth. She couldn't get married to him. They could not marry, and that was a one-off. Maybe a few, people were in love with each other, mixed race, love affairs, for sure. But the majority was rape. And I just don't think you can get over that fact. That is a fact. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. We have Lynn, then Amal, then Shelly, then Glenn. Greer, do you want to be back on the list? No?
Yes, I do.
Yes, okay. All right, Lynn.
Well, I'm going to just say, don't forget the free people of color in New Orleans. When the Americans made the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, 1/3 of the population of New Orleans was free people of color. So, and although under the Code Noir, the French law, they couldn't marry. And of course, the Americans continued this practice that people of different races couldn't marry. There were relationships that were voluntary. That has nothing to do with slavery and rape. But just remember that our population in New Orleans is very special, and we had different laws than what they might have had in Georgia, and different practices. But what I really wanted to talk about is the Mardi Gras Indians, that we should not look at them as being ashamed of their race. We should look at them as being a great creative expression. There was a terrific exhibit at the Presbytère curated by Ron Bichet, the artist, and Kim de Villiers-Vaz, who's written the book about the baby dolls. And they showed that the Mardi Gras Indians of New Orleans had elements of West African costuming and Caribbean costuming. And they had videos from Africa, people dressed in feathers and robes and dancing. And the African culture was not forgotten in New Orleans. On Sundays, enslaved persons were allowed to congregate in Congo Square, and families were kept together under the French law until children were at least 11. At least that was the theory. And so a lot of African culture was transmitted. And the Mardi Gras Indians, I think, are a great source of pride. Oh, let me just say one quick thing. That exhibit at the Presbytere was had objects from the Musée Branly in Paris. And now that exhibit is showing at the Musée Branly in Paris until January. It's something to be very proud of.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. Next we have Amal.
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
So I challenge everyone to look up a term called the $5 Indian. A lot of people might not know what that is, but Greer was touching on the financial aspect of why a lot of these tribes will not admit the Black freedmen's off of the Dawes Rolls, the descendants of the people from the Dawes Rolls into their tribe, as they were supposed to do in the 1866 treaty mentioned in the article. And all of the wealth and everything was supposed to be allocated towards those freedmen, descendants of those freedmen. So a lot of these tribes, believe it or not, whether that be the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, Seminole, Cherokee, which will consider the 5 civilized tribes, the Muskegee, they have a lot of $5 Indians that's the presidents and the heads of these tribes. So being that these $5 Indians are the presidents and the heads of these tribes, when they see people who look like my mother's side of the family, who have that legitimate Native American, well, at least this is what my mother tells me, the legitimate Native American phenotype or blood, when those people come, those $5 Indians who sit at the heads of these tribes will not allow them to be admitted into the tribe. And then they definitely not gonna let my mother's son, who looks like me, come and have my name on the Dawes Rolls as a descendant of a person on the Dawes Rolls. So look up the term $5 Indian. I challenge everyone to do that so that you can have a clear understanding of what happened and how it happened and why a lot of these freedmen and descendants of the people on the Dawes Rolls are not allowed into these tribes.
Okay. Thank you, Amal. You have exactly 2 minutes. Shelly, you're next.
Okay. Yeah, so this is really fascinating. I had heard about Don Cheadle and some others, and I have friends actually whose parents were of the Choctaw or the Chickasaw freedmen, and on one side, and then Cherokee. So we'd always had this conversation, but we're learning more now that I didn't know as well. I recently read an article when you're talking about $5 Indians, when you're talking about this article didn't refer to $5 Indians, but clearly talked about why it became easy for, say, I'm looking at this article, they're speaking about the Chickasaw Indians and why it was lucrative, or it sounded attractive for them to actually own slaves. And of course, you know, articles are articles, but this seems right. It says, but to be fully civilized, and this is the article is called The New African, but to be truly civilized, Native Americans had to be convinced to become slave owners like the whites and view slavery as good and not an evil. The only way to protect and preserve an economic system built on human bondage. Thus did the Chickasaw and other natives embark chattel slavery and become allies of the white slavers and enemies of enslaved Africans. And from a quote from 1758 by Governor of South Carolina, James Glenn, it has always been the policy of this government to create an aversion in African Americans to Negroes. So there was a lot had to do with finances too. It didn't take much for whites to win the Chickasaw over to slavery. The Chickasaw were eager for the metal pots, guns, and the alcohol, one of the trades. And it goes on and on about the financial reason. And then also, to become civilized, it's to be closer to white. So I just think the more reading. Okay, so thank you.
All right, thank you, Shelly. I see Nala is helping you attend.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, that's the dog, her grand dog. Okay. Glenn, you're next.
Yeah, I'm going to come back on some of what I said about the woman being married, especially because I know Lynn is a historian, and as I remember correctly, the woman stayed a slave, but the offspring would inherit the it was like a common law marriage. It was not a legal marriage, but it was like a common law marriage. The child would inherit the father's inheritance. And during the Civil War, there were 3,000 Creoles on the side of the Confederacy because they were fighting to protect their property, which were slaves. So these people who had slaves, where did these people of color come from that had slaves? And where did they get the ownership? Where did they get the land from if they didn't inherit it from a Frenchman? So and to talk about rape, hell, we got rape going on right now, every day. It ain't done by no slave master. It's done. They got some of it being done by blacks. They got statutory rape being done by blacks. So it happens. There's some men will rape, and some men will induce women into being with them.
Okay. Thank you, Glenn. Okay, we have Greer and then.
I wanted to ask a clarifying question.
Oh, clarifying. That's two fingers.
That's
okay.
2 fingers. Sorry about that.
Put me back on the list because I know I have some trouble.
All right. Continue.
The question I wanted to ask as relates to something that Glenn said. He said that he was talking about the rape that happened under the system of slavery and people who are raping today. The question I want to ask is that the people who are raping people today versus during the times of slavery, is the rape that people are committing today protected by law? In other words, could they lawfully do it and get away with it and not be brought to court and prosecuted versus the slave master who raped his slave, who will not be brought to court and prosecuted for it?
Of course, you already know the answer to that.
No, I want you to answer the question because you made the statement.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's a difference.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You answered my question.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We have Greer and then Glenn. Does anyone else want to get on the list? Okay, Greer.
Amal talked about the Dawes rolls. And yeah, a lot of white people got on the Dawes rolls because they had $5 and wanted to be registered as Indians to get the benefits, the financial benefits that go along with that. Remember when Donald Trump wanted to open up a casino? And Donald Trump was mad, I think, because he couldn't be a part of it or something had happened. And it was so funny because even he said it out loud. I forgot. I guess this had to be like in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. He said, I'm looking at the board of these people who are about to open up this casino, and I don't see one Indian on a boat. I don't see one person that looks like they're an Indian. They all look like they could have came from The Hague in Sweden, but yet they were registered on the dog. Their families had been registered, and it carried over financially to where they benefit. I mean, nobody looked Indian. And I'm gonna go back a little bit in the history with the Kwajales Balls. The women who of color who were free, they went to these balls to where they could find mates to financially take care of them. And sometimes their children were freed or educated, but it wasn't always guaranteed. And they weren't gonna always, if the father decided to give them land, but guess what? The wife who was married to the man didn't have to honor that. And that term is called placage. That's what it was called, placage. It was basically a term that meant an agreement. An agreement was made by the women who, I guess, sort of like an agent who represented these young ladies at these balls. They would be financially taken care of, given a house to live. There were certain requirements that went along with the children. And that's what we were doing down here. They weren't marrying these women. They just were in arrangement with the ones who was free and not enslaved. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greer. Okay, next, Glenn, you wanted to. Glenn, there you go.
Oh, yeah. On the American Indian, not the American Indian, the Mardi Gras Indian. And I don't know why people can't see that we had a problem with who we were and wanted to be somebody else. You know, in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 40s, you used to see African American men processing their hair to look like a Caucasian hair. I mean, putting chemicals in their head that will burn their scalp to make their hair look like Caucasian hair. And you tell me you can't see that we wanted to be somebody else other than who we were, and the Indian was a way, dressing up like an Indian was a way to be somebody who we didn't like, we hated ourselves, and still hate ourselves because we killed each other for no reason at all. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. All right, next we have Phyllis, and then we have Shelly.
Well, I want to say that, you know, the current day Native Americans don't have it so good, despite the, you know, that they get money from their tribal councils or whatever they're called now. They live in poverty. The Indian Health Service, you know, is not necessarily top-notch healthcare. There's disease. We know they're excluded from voting because they don't actually have addresses on their homes. We talked about that in the past. And I think I would recommend the show Reservation Dogs. That's got a really good take on modern day Native Americans. It's in its second season. It's about like a group of young people, I think in Oklahoma, and it's on Hulu. So I think in the US, we have a tendency to sort of romanticize, and it's almost simultaneously believe the best and the worst about Native Americans. And I think, you know, like any group of people, there's good and bad among them. And I would encourage us to, you know, learn about what is happening now. And this article is an example because the Cherokee Nation is making steps to own up to their past and what they did. So, I mean, that's better than most white people in this country. So I think that's all for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. All right, now Shelly next.
All right, you didn't notice my hand up?
Your hand is up, but you after Shelly.
All right, but you got to acknowledge that you saw it.
I saw it. I wrote your name down. Okay. Shelly?
Yeah,
Are you there? Okay.
I wanted to speak on what was just spoken on about understanding what is happening with Native Americans today. I think that a lot of us are knowledgeable and probably should know more about how they are suffering and how they were treated. But I think it's important to note that for so long we didn't know this history, and it's right and just that we discuss this. This is not about condemning any one of the 5 civilized tribes, so much as it is understanding our history and understanding our relationship and how we had been miseducated and not told these kinds of things and left out historically and financially. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, what Glenn spoke about, self-hatred, and that is a topic that may perhaps should be discussed with the race on a, maybe that should be the topic, and that there's no question that there is that, and it's not just the men who are processing hair, they're women and everything, because we were told that to look closer to white, be closer to white, to gain some privilege. And I don't mean negative privilege, I mean some way to overcome, and that happened, that started with slavery, the psychological damage and the trauma. So it's not something that I don't think we can just pull out and say, well, here's an example of how we did that. There was a reason for all of that merits a more nuanced discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time. Okay, Glenn?
Yeah, the Indian story, we look at the Indian story just one way, that these people were so peaceful and they were so kind, and they were they never done anybody no wrong. It was that white man coming over here trying to take their land and killing them, and do you know the Indian tried to take other people's lands too and kill them also. Them Apaches were not some nice people. They would kill every man in the village. Just like you seen the soldiers came in and attacked the Indians. Them Apaches were the same way. They were a warlike tribe. And if they wanted your land, if they wanted your horses, they were going to kill you for it. So we only look at the Indian in one way, if somebody being victimized. Oh, and they know how to talk.
You muted. There you go.
Yeah, they know how to torture. Indians know how to torture you too. They know how to burn you.
You out. I don't know what you're doing. You keep going out.
They know how to torture you and put ants all over you, and all those. See, we only look at them as victims and perfect human beings. So it's not a surprise to me they had slaves.
Okay,
that's it.
Thank you. All right, and then we have Amal, and then I think we'll go to the wrap up. Shelly, your hand is still up. You're not. It's just up. Are you looking to get on the list? No. Okay, Amal, go ahead.
I thought I saw Phyllis's hand.
No?
Just say it in
What-
the wrap up.
Okay, all right, Amal, and then we'll go to the wrap up. Okay.
Yeah, one of the things we have to realize is that the concept of race as defined by the European, the Native Americans did not hold that same idea or concept. If you go into the historical record, you will find Native Americans adopting people into their tribe who are not Native American, because the idea or the concept of race, the way the European defines it, the Native American didn't hold that same idea. So I'm giving this historical reference as it relates to the Mardi Gras Indian. The Mardi Gras Indian is a result of that. Black people being adopted into the tribe, not because they were Native American, because the Native American didn't have the same idea or concept of race as the European did. So you could be adopted into the tribe and actually be Native American. You saw that in the movie was mentioned, Dances with Wolves. That white woman who was adopted into the tribe, she was one of them, because she was adopted as a member. So there were Black people who were equally adopted as members into these Native American tribes, and since they married and there were children, and those children, the heritage of those children are what we know as the Mardi Gras Indians today.
Okay.
And so a lot of people don't necessarily understand that history, because the idea of race, the way we understand it, is based off of a European construct, i.e. Negroid, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and the list goes on and on with the European. But the Native Americans did not have that same concept of race the way that the European did. So I think that's something that we got to keep in mind when we're having these conversations, when we're discussing race. You cannot base race the way the European understand it and think that other people in those times had those same ideas and concepts of race, because you can be a part of the Native American tribe and not necessarily be Native American.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're gonna move on to the wrap. It's 11:10, and we're gonna move on to the wrap up. And the people who haven't spoken,
Excuse me, can I ask a question of Amal?
yes.
Now, Amal, is that construct, that concept of race, based on the European construct versus this other Native American absence of that construct? Is that similar to what Malcolm was trying to verbalize when he went to the Mecca and saw that people looked at him in a different way, not based on race? All different shades of colors were kind of ignored. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am familiar with that. I'm not sure that concept is the same. I'm simply saying that when the Europeans, it was a European guy. His last name is Blumenbach. I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Blumenbach. And he is the guy that came up with the modern day construct of the way we understand race today. Like I said, he separated the human family into these little categories like Negroid, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, being like people who are Japanese and Chinese and Korean. And so when he did that, that became the catalyst by which most human beings on the planet understand race today. But once again, the Native Americans didn't have that same concept. And so what Malcolm experienced when he was just experiencing the idea of being treated in a humane way, not necessarily based on the color of his skin. That's what he felt when he was in Mecca.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he was expressing when he got back to the United States.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we're going to move on to the wrap up. Okay, where you get 1 minute to speak, but people who haven't spoken throughout the discussion get their full 2 minutes to say whatever their wrap up thoughts may be, or whatever thoughts they have about the discussion. And we'll start with Pedro. Pedro.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hope I didn't just lose 20 seconds. Anyhow, hey, a couple of things. A very, very provocative discussion in an area that I have great ignorance in and still do, but perhaps a little bit less. Thank you for that. I was struck by a few comments. There's a science behind levels of the negative impact of racism on African Americans based on the color, the shade of the color of their skin. That the darker black shade creates more negative impacts, so to speak, or likely more negative impacts. And I do think that it's really worth focusing on culture and how oppression manifests itself in so many different ways. And Glenn mentioned, the conking of the hair. I mean, literally putting it in lye, burning your head, burning your skin, and your scalp, just in order to look, that change the color and the whole hair thing and all of that. And I think Reverend Story mentioned something about the Copenhagen deal. And at the end of the day, under oppression, people have got to survive. And some people choose different pathways to survive. Some have become revolutionaries. Some, accommodate and take the path of lesser resistance. And by doing so, sometimes, compromise, their own human dignity and that type of thing. And that's an oppression outcome, not a free. That's really all I wanted to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Pedro. Next, Nora.
I don't have additional comments, but thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Nora. Marva.
Want to thank you, Nancy, for bringing this article up for discussion. I want to say I learned much more from this discussion, a lot to think about. I hope we revisit this topic. Thank you all for your input.
Thank you, Marva. Okay, next week, everyone else to follow. That was the end of the people who hadn't spoken. Everyone else, if you could please take a minute to give your final thoughts. So start with Marion.
This was a great article, Nancy. I'm glad that you brought the topic to the forefront. I thought it was very provocative and interesting. And as far as self-hatred is concerned, I don't hate myself. Those of you that have known me a long time, I am a person of faith, and I believe God did not make any mistake. So therefore, I don't hate myself. I didn't create myself, and the person who created me wanted me to look like this, and I'm happy as I can be. So thanks again for this article, Nancy.
Okay, thank you, Marion. Lynn.
This article and the discussion highlights the need for more historical studies in our schools. And it's a very sad thing going on in our country right now, that people want less history taught in our schools, and they want only myths and platitudes taught. So there can be no reconciliation of our population without truth. We need more history. Thank you. Thank you for the article.
Thank you, Lynn. Larry.
Yes. I didn't comment this morning during the board meeting because I'm not a member of the board, but many Blacks have a serious problem in equating the Black struggle for human and civil rights with the LGBTQ community. And Erace has always sort of been void of Black males being a part of it. As you can see, the dominant people who are part of this organization is elderly people, white, whether they're white or Black. So I think before we go down that path, we should tread very carefully before we get away from the original reason as to why racism was established. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, Phyllis.
Well, I just want to say that we all have what is called confirmation bias, and we look into things and we accept things and ignore other things if they don't tell us what we already believe. So I think when we're doing any reading or historical research, or even if it's watching a documentary, you have to really think about and be aware of what is the motivation behind this message in this book, article, website, documentary, whatever. And really do research and look into wider readings and writings and research on those things. Whether it's like the Palestinian-Israeli issue, whether it's the trans people across cultures, we have to really do research and get grounded in what really happened. So, and I wasn't at the board meeting, but I definitely support broadening our mission statement to include more people. And I wouldn't say many, I would say some people of color might not support the LGBTQIA, but there are certainly many, many who do. And also many of the LGBTQIA community are people of color. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Phyllis. Louise.
I want to add to what Amal was saying about the different types, genotypes, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, etc. There wasn't one. It wasn't just the Native Americans who didn't accept any race name. It was actually Europeans at that time of when they were annihilating all of the native Indians, that they made up all these terms, and they didn't have a term for Native Americans, or they didn't make one because they thought that they would all disappear from disease or some form of genocide or annihilation. So they don't even have one on the books about them, which I thought was interesting. As far as self-hatred goes, Shelly, that's a great idea. If we could have an article, if you want to be bring an article, and I think that also would be an interesting topic for sure. And as far as the article today goes, I really did learn something. It was fantastic of you to bring this, because yes, I definitely learned something. And the end of it, they did own up to it. So I think that's also a good, yes, people did wrong, but then they owned up to it, and better late than never, right? So thank you very much. Great discussion today.
Thank you. Amal.
Yes, great article. I'm very well aware of this history. Everything that I said, because Glenn said something as it relates to being a historian. I too am a historian, and everything that I said today could absolutely 100% be fact checked. And I challenge him or anybody else on the board who think I just made that stuff up to go and fact check me. I don't just say things just to say them. I say things, and if anybody who've ever heard me speak at these meetings, I always back up with historical facts. I don't just throw things out there. I'll say something, and I'll say, and then I'll show you in the historical record where it happened, when it happened. So I am too a historian, and I challenge anybody to fact check me. Thank you, Larry, for bringing out the this idea of marrying our struggle with the LGBTQ. I ain't with that. I'm not them, and they're not me, and our struggles are not the same. So I don't want the African American struggle to be married to the LGBTQ struggle, and we're struggling for the same thing. We're not. I don't walk their path, and they're not walking mine, and I don't want our paths to look like they're the same, because they're not. Thank you.
Thank you, Amal. Shelly.
Yes, great discussion. I want to thank everyone for allowing me to contribute. The actual subject matter is one that should continue to be discussed and researched and all of that, because we just, there's so much that we don't know or didn't know. As far as the issue of self-hatred, I think it was Pedro who talked about the effects of oppression. I think that was him, and I really appreciated his thoughts about that and what people will do to survive oppression and intense oppression. And as we look at what I read about the Chickasaw and all of that and their actions, perhaps that's part of it. What will I do to survive and to persevere and to preserve my life? I don't know. But anyway, but then continuing on that with oppression, I think it was Louise who said that should be further discussed. I've always felt that with Black people, there needs to be pockets of discussion because it's so important. That's a crucial conversation. But I've always believed, and this is just my belief, I've always believed that before we discuss that with a wider range of folks who aren't African American, who aren't Black, that those are some things that we have to reckon with amongst ourselves first, because there's so much we don't understand about it, and it's psychologically it should be something that's very intentional and treated with respect to how that oppression has left us. Actually, we're coming out of this system of oppression and self-hatred, and how it has affected our individuals and our families, our communities, our neighborhoods, everything. So that's it, if that makes any sense. Thank you.
It does. Thank you so much, Shelly. Greer.
Great discussion. I enjoyed it. Like I said, I've learned this a long time ago. But we have to be mindful of whose history who we ingest. Because if you think about it, there are people who say, oh, the slaves, they were well taken care of and well fed, and they were treated like members of the family. There are a lot of historians out there. You have to choose carefully. And another thing that I didn't get a chance to touch on, like, there were Africans in the Americas before Europeans even got here. Africans who came over, they were great mariners who were already established here, and artifacts have been found here in America. So my question would be, and I've been reading about this, were they reclassified and enslaved versus the so-called, what we call Native Americans today? Because where did they go? That's it. Everybody have a great weekend and enjoy yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Greer. And lastly, we have Glenn. Okay, you always say we never leave you for last, but today I've left you for last.
Well, I enjoyed it. I didn't know that those rascals had slaves, you know, those Cherokees. And I was crying over their tears of their little tears there that they went through. But I didn't really know that they had slaves. But in a discussion, and you know, for the lady who just started in our meetings, we've been talking about African American, everything, just about everything. 'Cause it's been going on for about 20 years. These discussions have been going on about 20 years, and we have. So I didn't have to start off from scratch mentioning some of our scarred psyches. They didn't heard a lot in these meetings, and we should want to keep it private because you want to reach the masses. This is being recorded. It's going out to the masses. You're not going to treat the problem by not going out to the masses. Yeah, we need some healing. We need some psychological treatment to what our souls have endured. But it takes those who have overcome some of these psychological scars to talk to it, not the ones that are scarred. That's all I have to say on that.
Okay, well, thank you, Glenn. Okay, well, I get to give my thoughts or my final thoughts on the topic. I want to thank everybody for coming. It was an interesting discussion. I also want to mention that Shelly, upon reading the article last night, sent me a article called America's Black Indians, a Hidden Heritage. And it's on newafricanmagazine.com. Anyway, the reason that I mention that is because that article goes much deeper and gives a much broader history than the article that I sent you to read today. I'd really suggest if you want to know a lot more detail. The America's Black Indians, a Hidden Heritage. And you can find it on newafricanmagazine.com.
Excellent documentary. It's an excellent documentary.
Yes. And so it was very detailed, much more detailed than the article that you read today. It has all the points that I had, but much more that you can read about. Okay. And so I highly recommend it. So anyway, but the things that I got from this discussion, not only, I think we need to have more discussion on some things came up on the Mardi Gras Indians. I have heard so many different stories about the origins of the Mardi Gras Indians. I would really, I mean, I can, look it up myself, but I really think we need to have a discussion in a future Erace discussion about Mardi Gras Indians. Because to me, like I've heard several different versions of the origins and why they exist and so forth. And also on free people of color, okay? Because yes, I have heard of the octoroon or quadroon balls. I've heard of plaçage, I've heard of that. There have been differing about whether the children could inherit or whether they freed them or whether they left. What exactly happened back then? I mean, I'm sure there's some documented history and some facts about what happened before the Americans came, because when the Americans came, I was reading this book called One Drop by Bliss Broyard, which is very interesting. And she found out when her father died that her father was Creole from New Orleans. He had been passing for white his entire life. And so when she found this out, she said it took her a couple of years to wrap her mind around it. But when she finally did, she came to New Orleans and studied the history of her father's family and went all the way back to, that's how I learned about before the Americans came, what life in New Orleans was like. I mean, she does an extensive history on her father's family that originated in France, her father's lineage that originated in France, and how they came to America and how her family came to be, which is an excellent study about New Orleans in general, about the people, about Creole people, of just, it was fascinating, and I highly recommend it. It's called One Drop, and her name is Bliss Royard. But anyway, it is 11:32, and I want to thank everybody for coming. We can stop recording.